Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. In Mexico, there is a beach that goes by the name of Rosarito. The rocks on that beach made advertising executive Gary Dahl over $6 million back in 1976. Those rocks were a smooth stone that was soon better known as Pet Rock. These rocks were marketed as if they were live pets. They had their own cardboard boxes, straw, and breathing holes for the animal. People buying the pet rock knew fully well what they were buying, and yet they went along with the gag. They leafed through the 32-page official training manual, which included instructions on how to care for the rock. You could, it joked, teach the rock to sit, to stay, but roll over and shake hands was a little harder to explain. What was important back then and what is just as important right now is that people knew it. They knew it was a gag. They knew it was a dummy. They knew they were buying something that they really couldn't do much with and couldn't do much for them. But they went along with the joke. And when it comes to marketing or selling our products and services, we often don't realize that we're doing something similar. We're dealing with a dummy. We think we're doing the right thing when we are choosing an audience. In the book, The Brain Audit, there's a whole chapter on why this premise of target audience leads you off the path and into dummy land. And yet, the one thing that we've heard over and over again is the concept of target audience. It's our pet rock moment. We are stuck with something that seems fun and exciting, but won't do anything but play dead. This episode takes on the issue of target profile and why it's so important. Thousands of clients have read the book, The Brain Audit, and yet I see so many of them mixing up the concept of target profile and target audience. So, how do we separate the two, once and forever? In this episode, we cover 3 parts as always. The first thing we're going to cover is the blind spot with target profile, and why we keep repeating the same mistake over and over again. In the second section, we go deeper into the concept of the dummy, and we examine person versus persona. And finally, we'll take a look at some of the questions to ask in a target profile interview. Let's start with the blind spot, shall we? Why do we keep making the same mistake over and over and over and over and over again? I remember when I took my first driving test in Auckland, New Zealand. Now, I drove a manual, what you'd probably call a stick shift. And as part of my test, I was asked by the testing officer to go down a hill. Immediately, I put the gear into neutral and I coasted downhill. You know what happened next, don't you? As exhilarating as it can be to race down the hill at top speed, you shouldn't ever put a car in neutral when heading downhill. There are a whole bunch of things that can go wrong. But that downhill drive, that was my blind spot. I had done it so many times before that I didn't see that it would not only cause a problem, but it would get me a nice big F as in failed for my test. Most of us make the same mistake when we get down to working with our target profile. When asked about our target profile, we get drawn into the error of describing a target audience. And this mistake is reasonable because almost every marketing book or course talks mostly about an audience, a target audience. It suggests that we should look for a bunch of people. For example, people who are afraid of making presentations, or teachers, or people who want to be coaches. These are audiences. It talks about targeting huge groups of people all at once. Now, this is a great starting point, but it's only the starting point. An audience won't get you very far. You may not be focusing on an audience, but instead on a type of person. So instead of people who are afraid of making presentations, you think of a fictional person and you say, okay, let's call him Chris. And then you go on to rattle off the factor of how this fictional person named Chris may end up being terrified of presentations. And you think you're on the right track at this point. But a testing instructor would still fail you. And this is because you're not paying attention to that blind spot. When we use the term target profile, it's not an audience and it's not a let's call him Chris situation. Because if you say, let's call him Chris, you're saying the following. Chris is a fictional person. He's kind of like a real person, but not a real person. He kind of lives in a real house, but not in a real house. He kind of lives in a real city, but it's not a real city, and then his dog is fake, and his girlfriend, well, she could be Lady Gaga or Ellen DeGeneres. Well, it's fictional, so who cares? This guy eats fictional hamburgers. He can chomp through 700 at one go right after he's had 53 shots of tequila. And you see the difference between real and fictional, don't you? Because the Chris I used to know wasn't fictional. He lived about 20 minutes from my place. He was a genius at computers. He didn't drink water. He only drank wine and milk. He was grumpy as hell, and yet he was extremely helpful. And if I wanted to go out with Chris for lunch, I knew that I'd have to deal with his grumpiness. I knew exactly what he'd want. And the Chris that I used to know wasn't interested in making presentations at all. But I do know Christina, and Christina isn't a big fan of making presentations. She would rather bake 24 cakes and have kittens than speak. And we're not even talking about the hard task of presentations. We're talking about just standing up at a networking meeting and speaking for 1 little minute. Christina knows that it's critical for her business. She knows that she's in a safe space with friends. But she can't overcome the wave of panic that sets in the night before. She prepares like crazy, but it's the same thing over and over and over again. She can't sleep well, the drive to the event is an ordeal, and she looks at all of these people at the networking meeting, so cool, so relaxed, and wonders if she can ever be like them. And then, when she's done, she feels like somehow she could do a better job. She's happy to go back to the office, turn off the phone, recharge, and just do what she's good at doing, instead of doing these crazy presentations. But now she has to make a presentation, and she's terrified. Now that's the emotion and drama you get with a real person, but there's more. Fictional people can't tell you when you're going on or off target with your message. An audience can try to get a message to you, but everything gets lost in the noise. The only way that you can get to a target profile is to have a real person. Just like that testing instructor in the car with me. If he were fictional, I would have passed the driving test. I'd also be likely to win $50 million in the lottery on the very same day, but instead, I failed. I learned from my mistake. I spotted my big blind spot. And today, I'm your driving instructor. Instead of coasting downhill and putting others and ourselves at danger, let's keep the car in gear. Let's use the concept of the target profile as it was meant to be used, shall we? Let's explore the questions you're going to need when conducting a real client interview, which is where we run into the second problem. More often than not, we run into the concept of persona. We're told we don't need to focus on a real person, but we can easily base our marketing on a character. It's almost like a fictional novel, and we can make the character up as we go. Except what we end up with is a little Frankenstein.
And I believe the world should beware.
A Frankenstein with random body parts all stitched together. Now that's the difference between a person and persona. And we're about to find out why a person, a real person, matters a lot more than persona. When my niece Marcia was about to turn 8, she wanted a dog for her birthday. In fact, Marcia's always wanted a dog for her birthday. When she was 3 years old, she wanted a dog for her birthday. When she was 4, 5, 6, and to this day, she still wants a dog for her birthday. But anyway, going back to the 8th birthday, she asked for a dog for her birthday. And her parents realized that someone had to walk the dog, and there would be trips to the vet. Plus, you have to train the dog, and then they poo all over the place on the carpet, and you have to do all the stuff. And so Marcia got a toy dog instead. And it barked, and you could pull it around, and it sounded like a real dog. But it was a dummy. And that's a problem with persona. Persona is when you assume the role of another person. You try and walk in that person's shoes. Now, your shoe size is 10, but that person wears a size 13, and you assume things will be fine. Somehow you'll manage. But you don't, and you can't, because while we can all try to imagine what that person is going through, that's all we can do. We can imagine. In short, we get dummy text, dummy words, dummy emotions from our dummies. To get real text, real words, real emotions, we have to go to a real person. Not real people, one person. Because a real person will not have dummy thoughts or dummy words. So, what are dummy words? When you have to write a sales page, for instance, dummy words look like they were written by you or me, and we're sitting in our office and we're looking at a computer screen. So we churn out words that are stifled and they are boring. Or worse, we make copy headlines like, "Who else wants to blah blah blah?" And then we slap it on our headline or our landing page. But that's not how a target profile speaks. A target profile speaks from a place of real emotion. If we go way back into psychotactics land when we first started, I remember sitting there and explaining my website issues to someone. And this is what I said. I said, I feel trapped by my website. Every little change I have to make, I have to go back to the developer. And then I have to wait because he's busy or he's asleep or something. And I feel like I'm at his mercy all the time. And it's a crappy feeling. I want to be able to have more control over my website, to do my own things. And yes, I understand the bits and pieces that need to be added, but for the most part, I want the control. I want to be like the person that can drive instead of being driven. Do you feel that raw emotion? Well, with persona-based writing, all you have to do is make that stuff up. For instance, let's look at the Nobis Hotel. They have a persona-based website, and this is by their own admission. And here's what it reads like. The personas are frequent travelers who are sick of sterile chain hotels. They want something different. They want to make their own decisions on where to stay using the web and social media. Buyers want upscale luxury, but in modern style, not the old world traditional style. So that's the persona description that they have. But how does it look on their homepage? How does it reveal those problems? And here's what it says. Nobis Hotel is an independent 201-room first-class luxury hotel in Stockholm, Sweden, occupying a prime spot on a square, which I can't pronounce. And then they go on to say the single most central and attractive location in the downtown area. Nobis Hotel is a new center stage of Sweden's royal capital, defining our own personal sense of Stockholm's hotel luxury. It calls itself modern, elegant, extremely comfortable, but also ethically sound, warm, and moderate. It says it provides their guests with true value for their money in a stylish and pleasant setting, designed by award-winning architects. Does that sound like a real person speaking? A person talks in a plain language. He or she has real emotions, real frustrations. And it makes it super easy for you to take their exact words, put it down on your sales page or homepage, or any page for that matter. It's the emotion and the words that are attracting your audience. Yes, I did say audience, because even though you start out with one person, that one person's voice attracts others, just like her. So if your target profile is Rita, all the Ritas of the world are attracted to that message. And so you get a consistent audience, an audience that identifies with that one big problem. They want to solve that one big problem. So instead of trying to juggle with different personality types and multiple problems, you solve a single problem. And it's all being handed to you on a platter. There's no thinking, there's no research, there's no fiddling with keywords, and it still works for you. My niece Marcia is much older now, but even as a child, she clearly knew the difference between a real dog and a dummy one. When you're dealing with target profile, you have to deal with someone real. Otherwise, you just have a dummy. And this takes us to the third part, where we look at some of the questions to ask in a target profile interview. The worst problem with target profile interviews is not knowing where to start. And logically, we believe there must be some way to have a set of questions. And so we create a bunch of questions, but in reality, those questions don't always work. The target profile interview doesn't always follow a path. Suddenly, you're wondering whether it's a good idea to have the interview at all. And it is. Even if you botch it up, a target profile interview is still an amazing experience because you hear that client speaking about your business in a way that you probably never heard before. But there's still the issue of creating the questions. How do you create those questions? Well, you don't. What you're looking to do is to get a bunch of components together instead. I know, it sounds technical, but here's what you're trying to get. The list of problems. That's the first thing that you're trying to get. You're going to get, or you have to get, all the problems that the customer faces when they're dealing with a product or service like yours. So that's the first thing. You want to ask the client what problems they're facing. And they've got a list, believe me. So they'll give you that list. They'll tell you that list, and you're recording it. You're not just writing it down. You're writing it down and recording it. So that's the first thing. The second thing that you're going to get is what is their biggest problem. So when you have that list of problems, you still have to figure out what is their biggest problem. You just ask them. They tell you what is their biggest problem. The third thing that we're looking at is why is it their main problem. So now they've got to elaborate why that problem is so critical for them. then what are the consequences of the problem not being solved? Oh, and by the way, if you're listening to this, I'll post all this as a transcript, though there's no need to make any notes and stop the car or stop walking. It's all going to be there. So just to go back, first, the list of the problems, then what is their biggest problem, then why is it their biggest problem, then what are the consequences of the problem not being solved? And then you go to their second biggest problem. Again, why is it a problem? What are the consequences of it not being solved? Then you're going to how do they look at it as a solution? What is their idea of a solution? And you get a very clear idea of what they want. Then you go to what are their main objections? What are the objections to buying a product or a service, even when they think it more or less meets their needs? Then you go to what would cause them to give a testimonial and what they see as a significant risk factor. Are there more than one risk factors? Can they describe it? And finally, what would make the product unique in their eyes? You probably figured out what's happening if you've read the Brain Audit. This is the Brain Audit unfolded. All those 7 red bags, the problem, the solution, the target profile. Of course, you're speaking to the target profile. The objections, the testimonials, the risk reversal, and the uniqueness. That's really what you're asking them. So, can you ask other questions? Sure you can, but these sets of questions enable you to get a ton of information that can almost literally be slapped right onto your sales page. Now, of course, when I say literally, a lot of people get too much information and then it has to be tweaked, and that's a completely different story. But you get the gist of it. You get a lot of information that can be put on your homepage or your sales page. There is re-engineering to do, but for the most part, you have all the stuff that you have been looking for. All the bags of the Brain Audit get covered in one fell swoop. But why bother with this interview at all? Because in many cases, you'll find that the client's problems are not what you anticipated. That there you are in your cubbyhole, you're imagining stuff, but the client doesn't feel that way at all. And there's more, of course. You get to hear the client's exact words, their terminology. Their emotions come surging through in the conversation. And for the first time ever, you can feel their pain. But what if you already felt their pain? Many of us start up a business because it seems like a good idea. But often, you start up a business because you feel the pain as well. So for instance, I felt the pain of being a cartoonist that was always on call. I wanted to have my vacations, and not just vacations, but substantial vacations. And so when I started out the business, Psychotactics, I started out trying to help myself. So I know that pain. I can go back and I can feel that pain. But not really. If you have ever had a big injury or operation, you'll know exactly what I mean. The pain at the point in time when you had that injury, it's unbearable. Yet several weeks later or months later, the memory of the pain is still there, but it's not quite there. After a few years, it's almost impossible to recreate that pain. The target profile has no such problem. They're in the emergency ward right now. They feel the torment of that pain. They know what it is to get to the problem. They know what it is to get to the solution. They understand that they're not keen to take the risk, and they will tell you why they don't want to take the risk. They'll tell you the uniqueness. They'll tell you everything. And that's what a target profile interview does. I know it sounds dramatic, but a target profile interview can change your world. It can change how you market to your audience. Conducting a target profile interview is a skill, and of course, like all skills, you get better as you go along. Every product that you have requires a different target profile interview. Every service that you have also requires a different target profile interview. So you got lots of chances to work out that skill. And if you sit at your computer and you just make up a persona or you just make up a dummy person, well, you're going to get a less than interesting sales page. But more importantly, you're going to do more work. It's very hard work writing a sales page. And of course, there are better ways to do it. But the point is the target profile interview. I still use it. It's not like I can't write a sales page. I've been writing sales copy since I joined Leo Burnett way back after university, which is now close to 25 years, maybe more. And yet I will use a target profile interview every time. There's a lot of information that comes out from that interview. And yes, you have to put it together. You have to remove bits. And that's the whole point. You're going to get better at this skill. You have to do it. You have to practice it a bit and hope that you get it wrong sometimes and hope that you get it right. But eventually you'll work it out. And if you're still struggling, you can always ask us about it in 5000 BC. But we'll talk about 5000 BC later. Right now, let's summarize what we've just covered. The first thing that we covered was the blind spot. And that we have this blind spot with target profile. We keep making the same mistake. We think of a target audience. And a target audience is not a target profile. A target audience is a vast number of people. And of course, you have to start with the target audience. You have to go, I'm going to look for teachers. And then you find one teacher like Annabelle. And then you speak to Annabelle and you ask Annabelle the questions. And of course, you're wondering right now, how do I know Annabelle is the right one? Well, essentially, it's someone who is going to buy your product or someone who feels like buying a product like yours, who feels that pain, but also can afford to buy it and who's on the edge of that purchase. That's the kind of person you're looking for. You're not looking for a fictional person. You're not looking for someone who may buy your product in the future or has bought a product like that a long time ago. You're looking for someone who is in that emergency ward right now. And that qualifies a person to be the target profile. But you can't start off with, okay, let's look at an audience, because an audience, an audience is an audience. What are you going to do with an audience? So we keep making that same mistake. We talk about an audience instead of one person, Annabelle. The second thing is that we don't look at an audience, we look at personas, and personas is that dummy. It's like that thing that doesn't exist. And what we get is a Frankenstein. We get all these parts put together because they're from different personas. And it probably works, but as a small business owner, you don't want to spend time working out, why is this thing not working? Instead, you go out there, pick up the brain audit, look at all the questions, look at all the components of the brain audit. They have the problem, the solution, the target profile, which we're talking about, the risk reversal, the objections, the testimonial, and uniqueness. Go and ask the client. Ask them what their biggest problem is. Ask them what their list of problems are. Ask them to define why it's a problem. Ask them what are the consequences of not dealing with this problem. They're going to tell you. Put it all on tape and write it down at the same time, because you never know. It's also always better. That's what professionals do. They write down and they record at the same time. And then get it transcribed. And then, if you have trouble, in 5000 BC, we can help you. So you can get to 5000 BC, and it's a great place to be because a lot of people that do these interviews are also introverts. So to get to this target profile interview in the first place is so difficult. You have to go out there and you have to meet with someone and you have to talk to them. And this is not something that you're entirely comfortable with. And then once you get it, how do you separate it? Well, that's what 5000 BC is all about. Well, that's part of what 5000 BC is all about. Essentially, 5000 BC is this very calm, comfortable, non-promotional place where people help each other. Our motto is to be kind, to be helpful, or be gone. And that's what you'll find in 5000 BC. So join us in 5000 BC and you'll find that it's a really cool place to be. But Find that out for yourself. Now, what else is happening in Psychotactics land? We finished the sale for the article writing home study. And like everything, 5000 BC members get priority. So in 6 or 7 hours, we sold out all the copies. When we say all the copies, people say, how many copies? 300, 500? No, 35 copies. We do fewer copies of everything. Yes, there is a scarcity factor. But the point is that we don't feel the need as a company to go out there and sell hundreds of copies of anything. And certainly not hundreds of people on a course. We have 35 people on like the cartooning course, which will be around July somewhere. And then we also have the article writing course, which is with you writing articles and me looking at them. And this is called the toughest writing course in the world. It's going to start up in July somewhere, probably the end of July. And we're going to pre-sell it before somewhere early May. So you have to be on the Psychotactics list, or better still in 5000 BC, because you get first priority. This is a very difficult course. It is about learning how to write magazine quality articles in 90 minutes. And it doesn't matter how long you've been taking, and it doesn't matter what you've been told before. It can be done, and we do this repeatedly, year after year, as we have done since 2006. It's a really great course. You don't get any sleep for 3 months, but you have someone holding your hand. You have someone who's very good at writing articles. That's me, by the way. And you'll see that once you do a Psychotactics course, it's like nothing you've ever done. I know it sounds bizarre, but most people that do Psychotactics courses, well, they want to do more of them. They do 2, 3, 4, 5 of them even, because what we're promising is a skill. We're not promising information. Well, not more information. What you need is a skill. If you can do something in 800 hours or 200 hours or 50 hours, why would you need 10,000 hours? That's ridiculous. The whole concept that you would need 10,000 hours. Because we're not looking to become Leonardo da Vinci. We're looking to get a skill across. We're looking to be able to write an article that's outstanding, that people like. And we're saying, well, can we do this in 90 minutes? And the answer is yes. So that's all we have for this episode of the 3-month vacation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have left a review on iTunes or on Stitcher. Please do so if you haven't. And join us in 5000 BC. We'd love to have you there. That's me, Sean D'Souza from Psychotactics.com. And we'll see you in 5000 BC. Bye for now.